Hey guys, Valerie here. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to take some time to talk about my most recent experience with burnout. Okay, so I have been working from home 100% of the time since the pandemic put us in a state of lockdown. So since March of 2020, I've pretty much been 100% remote. And I think for a lot of people who went from working in the office the majority of the time to becoming a remote worker, it definitely changes your perspective. It changes your mindset. Everything you have in mind in terms of how you plan your day and how you set up your routine changes. And for me, working remotely, as much as I enjoy it, also changed my perspective on how I was going to live my life. Because now, instead of going from home to the office and from the office to home, having that clear line of separation that I was used to, instead of having that, I now had an environment where all of my personal life and all of my professional life and most of my social life was happening in the same place. And that definitely can have an effect on your mental health, your emotional health, and just generally how you process situations and engage in situations. It wasn't the only time I've experienced burnout. As I've learned more about what burnout is, I've realized that I've actually experienced burnout multiple times throughout my life, and I didn't realize that that's what it was called or that's what it was. So now that I know the terminology, it's easier for me to identify it when it's happening. And most recently, the most recent time that I experienced burnout was when I found myself working my full-time job and then also balancing a couple of other additional commitments on the side. I tend to be involved in a lot of different things, and I've always had a really strong work ethic. So I think that's one reason why, when given the opportunity to take something on, I immediately jump at it because I love contributing and I love being a part of a team. I love finding fulfillment in my work. And when it's something that I'm passionate about, it's really easy for me to say, of course, I want to hop on that. I want to hop on that too. I want to hop on all of that, right? But one thing that I'm learning, especially in adulthood, is that you cannot spread yourself too thin. And it's totally possible to do that if you're not checking yourself at each step before you take on a new task. And so when I became burnt out, I was literally drowning in this big pot of soup of all these different things that I was doing. I was teaching code classes online. I was working my full-time job. I was handling different freelance contracts. And at some point, I realized life didn't feel the same. And I think that was the first signal for me in terms of realizing what was happening. Because I think a lot of the times when we're going through some form of mental distress, we don't immediately understand what it is because our brain is trying to process what's going on, but then we're also literally going through what's going on. So how am I supposed to identify this thing that's happening to me when it's literally happening to me? Your body kind of goes into shock, like a mental shock, I guess. Almost like when you suffer a traumatic injury, you're not quite sure what happened, which is probably why you can't immediately feel the pain when it happens, because your body goes into shock. It doesn't know what to do. And so for me, when I was going through my burnout, I was kind of in a state of mental and emotional shock. I didn't immediately realize that I was going through a burnout experience. All I knew was that life didn't feel right. My typical routines and the typical ways in which I engage with my daily tasks felt different. Eating felt different. Sleeping felt different. Waking up felt different. Even things that I took for granted, such as getting dressed in the morning, taking a shower, all those things felt different because I didn't feel like I was engaged in those things. It almost felt like I was removed from them. And my brain was doing this thing where it was constantly arresting. Like, I would be in the middle of something and all of a sudden I would pause and I'd look off into space and think, and not think at all, actually. I'd kind of just be there. And it's like my thought processes would freeze. We feel like we need to take on all these different things and constantly show up and constantly be engaged in what we're doing and not ask for help or take breaks or give ourselves a moment to breathe or be compassionate with ourselves. We feel like we constantly have to be on in order to perform, in order to succeed. And I think in my situation, I was constantly present for all the things I needed to do in my life, but I wasn't showing up for myself, and I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't taking those moments I needed to just breathe and just decompress and allow my brain to have a moment before going into the next thing. So if anyone has experienced burnout, or for anyone who's currently experiencing it right now, and perhaps you're looking for some ways to cope, I would say that one thing that has really worked for me is checking in with myself often. It gets a little hard to delineate between professional work and then hobbies and then personal life and social life, because all of those things kind of become combined when your environments merge. And so I check in with myself often. I try to make sure that before I take on a new task, I check in with myself and I reset and I think, okay, Val, can you take this on right now? Is this something that is going to be conducive to your self-care? Are you going to be able to still engage within your life and still show up for the things that matter while also taking this new task on? And I find asking myself those questions and constantly showing up for myself in those ways has really been beneficial to me in knowing whether or not I can take on a particular task. Now, obviously, like, this doesn't happen overnight. I'm still trying to figure out how I can do this on a consistent basis and also do the things that I love and feel fulfillment in my work the way that I do and continue to do so. But I think it's important that, especially as a professional or as a student or just as anything, that requires you to show up as your best self, you need a way to recharge and you need a way to constantly check in with yourself. Because if you're not, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone else who is, right? Because everyone else is looking after themselves. So you have to look after yourself too. When you show up to work, when you show up to class, when you show up to whatever it is that you do, where you have to be fully present, you have to be consistent with yourself and you have to be gracious with yourself. So for me, self-compassion is huge. I'm not always the best with it because I am so tuned in to how I can contribute to a particular task or particular project or a goal of mine. But I think in recent months, I'm learning how to best show up for myself first before I show up for all these other things that I'm involved in. So, with my recent experience with burnout, I think it is important to acknowledge how your body is reacting to certain stimuli. That was one way that I was able to clue into the fact that I was burnt out, because I didn't immediately realize. And I think a lot of us don't immediately realize when we've reached our limit. One thing for me is that I was starting to feel isolated from my normal surroundings. I wasn't able to engage the same way I normally do. And that was big, because you'll know for yourself what feels normal. You'll know when you eat something, or when you take a shower, or when you participate in a daily task. How is it supposed to feel? And that's when you have to really be in tune with your body physically, and be in tune with your emotions, and be in tune with how you mentally process things. Because if something feels different, it's time for you to check in and ask yourself, like, am I okay? Because if you don't, that's when you miss all of those, red flags. And then you realize after a whole bunch of missed red flags, you've run yourself into the ditch with the amount of stress and the amount of distress that you've been putting yourself through without even realizing it. So that's a big one for me, is constantly being engaged with myself, checking in with myself, making sure that I'm okay before I move on into this next task. Another one is, try and surround yourself with supportive people. And I don't just mean people who support you in sort of the kind of blind way of, yeah, no, take on that opportunity. It's a great opportunity. Keep going, girl. You do you. Take on that opportunity. Not necessarily. Sometimes you need people who are checked in with you to know, okay, you're currently involved in this thing. You're also doing that other thing. Are you sure you want to take on that additional thing too? Maybe you want to take a break. Maybe you want to tell those people no, or maybe you want to say no to that thing until the other thing is done and you've had a chance to breathe, recharge, and then move in to doing that thing. So having supportive people in your life who don't shame you for taking on too much, who don't blindly support you into doing too much, and who are there for you to help you kind of process your feelings around what's happening, to help you cope. Coping partners, as it were, I think is very important. So this can be in the form of a friend, it can be in the form of a coworker, of any kind of colleague, a family member, anyone that you can tap into who can help be a supportive person for you in the process of saying no to too much work, understanding your limitations, and also coping with the after effects of having been burnt out and burnt into the ground so hard because you've been overworked and overstressed. I think supportive friends and family are very important for me, because sometimes you need people who know you well enough to check and balance you a little bit, because you forget to do that for yourself. So people who hold you accountable and let you know that, wait a minute, you did this same thing last time and now you're doing it again. Are you sure this is going to work? And doing it in a way that's compassionate to the fact that you have a really strong work ethic, and that's okay. Being burnt out has nothing to do with the quality of your work ethic. All it is your body and your mind responding to having been stretched past the limit. And as human beings, we all have limits, and that's fine. But as human beings, it's also important for us to recognize these limits and to give ourselves compassion and grace so that the next time we want to show up, we're able to do it as our best selves. So I hope this video has been helpful to anyone who's experienced burnout before, including me, because I'm still going through the process of being better at listening to myself and checking in with myself. If you found this video helpful, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Feel free to follow me on social media where we can connect. And for now, I'm gonna say see you guys later, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.